I'll try and be succinct. I was reminded, I don't know who it was, but I was sitting here at the front at the beginning, and there were a couple of ladies, and maybe you too, so I won't point fingers, who were saying, have you heard this guy before? And I was listening into the conversation. It reminded me of the fact that I was speaking at the New Wine Conference in the UK, and I was doing I had the privilege of speaking and doing the Bible teaching in the Big Top. And I was walking there, striding there early before anyone else, with my notes. And I was just walking through, and there was a couple of older people standing outside the Big Top talking about me. I had no idea it was me. And they were going, one guy said, where are you going, Betty? said one guy. Where are you going to go here? That man there, or the one in the Big Top, or the one across here? Because there were 3 different options. And Betty said, I'm not going to go and hear the man in the Big Top again. He's very ranty. He shouts an awful lot and stomps around, takes his shoes off, wears bare feet, and I don't even know where you're standing with people like that these days. So I felt really encouraged. And I want to just talk really practically. One of the things that, you have a vague conversation with Lydia Reed about what you're going to talk about, and then she puts an itinerary together and then tells you what you're talking about. One of the things that she put in the section was what I would tell my 20-year-old self, which assumes I'm older than 20, which is frustrating. But I think I'd like to talk just for the next 20 minutes about some of the things that I've learned around leadership that I do teach my 20-year-old selves, because we have a church that I used to pastor, which is about 1,000 people, but they're 75% under the age of 30, so they're nearly all that kind of age and stage. And so I'm going to teach you through some things that I teach them as far as leadership is concerned, because they stand the test, actually, and they're really relevant to anyone. And one of the things I teach is that how you posture yourself towards your leadership is vitally important. And I talk about the circle, the line, the stake, and the open hands. The circle, the line, and the stake, and the open hands. By the circle, what I'm talking about is the fact that that you need to take responsibility for your leadership. We're living in a victim culture right now where everyone else is to blame, and it was because of this, and you didn't do this, and actually I like being a victim, and you take no responsibility for anything. But I talk about the fact that you have to take responsibility. The transformation that God wants to do through you, He first is going to do in you. And the circle refers to the fact that there was an evangelist called Gypsy Smith, who was an incredible evangelist. Like literally millions of people got saved through his ministry. And on one occasion he was asked the secret to revival. And he said, the secret to revival is this: get down on your knees and draw a chalk circle around yourself. And then don't get up off your knees until God has revived everything within the chalk circle. In other words, you're the project. You're the project. Firstly, you're the project. God is trying to do something in you that if He does it in you, can flow out of you. So the circle means this: there are no excuses. And yes, sometimes your church has not been everything it could be. And yes, the person who discipled you didn't disciple you properly. And yes, you weren't discipled. And yes, this situation happened. And yes, your father wasn't a great father. And yes, and yes, and yes. But He who is within you is greater than he who is in the world. And He has called you to something significant. And so discipleship, community, and mission is on you. It's on you. So I do a lot of work with pastors of churches. I coach a lot of pastors of churches. And the language is really interesting. Very quickly it becomes them and me. And I'm always saying, whoa, 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 whoa. If as the leader of your church, they're behaving in a dysfunctional way, that's on you. I mean, this doesn't mean they're right to do it. Doesn't mean they're not doing something wrong. But actually, you're the one with you're the one modeling leadership here. If your diaconate or your eldership or your whatever it is, vestry or whatever vestry is, I just got that thumbs up from. If your vestry is not behaving in a way that is honouring God, that's your issue to sort out. It's on you. It's on your leadership is on you. There will be no excuses. Secondly, the line. This is slightly more subtle. There comes a moment in every young leader's life, and it may come in your life, when you have to walk towards a line, draw it in the sand, and then look back over your life. And when you look back over your life, you'll realize there are people that hurt you, and there are people that you hurt. There are experiences that damaged you, and places where you damaged people. And you need to get help with those things. Because otherwise they create wounds in your heart that you will carry for the rest of your life. And it won't just damage you, it will damage everyone else that you try and lead. Because you'll be operating out of pain and hurt and your scars. Which doesn't mean that you can always get everything healed and everything sorted out and you'll be perfect, but it does mean that you have to make an impulse towards those things. So go visit a counselor, go get some prayer ministry, go do a sozo, whatever it is, but go chase after those things because you want to be healthy. Because you don't want people that you lead hurt by the shrapnel of your busted life. Does that make sense? And then you draw the line in the sand and you walk forward and don't look back. Because I see two dysfunctions happening. People who never did the business and then hurting everybody because they don't know what it feels like to be the other side of them. You've seen that leadership before, haven't you? They're still operating out of hurt and pain. Let me tell you a personal story. I was really, really hurt in the first church that I led by a couple of women who pretended to be close to my family, and then when it came to leadership in the church, effectively stabbed us in the back. Were gossiping about us. All the stuff that happens. And then when it came to it, the thing I thought I could trust, I couldn't trust. And when I got to the church in Edinburgh, there was a lady that reminded me very much of these two ladies. And everything she said, I didn't trust. And she hadn't done anything at all. But every time she opened her mouth, she would never have known it until I confronted her. Every time she opened her mouth, something in me went, don't trust that. Don't let that affect you. And therefore I became immune to anything that she was saying because of the hurt and pain of that previous relationship. And so I had to do some work and go back and do some forgiveness so that I could actually live functionally going forward. Does that make sense? Because you don't just want no excuses, you want no regrets. There will be no regrets. I'm going to be who God's made me to be. I'm not going to be that damaged person that got hurt by. That's not my identity. I'm going to deal with some stuff. The third thing is the stake. The secret to you being successful in your leadership is to find what God's got you for and do it with everything you've got. In other words, discover your why, in the words of Simon Sinek, or discover your yes and defend it with 1,000 no's. That's in the words of Karl Martin. Find your yes and then defend it with 1,000 no's. There will be no distractions. And this is more important than you think it is. Because there are people serving in our churches in roles they should not be serving in because they're taking hold of something that someone took hold of them for rather than something that Jesus took hold of them for. In other words, they haven't worked out who they are. And sometimes depending upon the era they grew up in. My wife grew up in the Brethren, and there are a bunch of things she had to deal with here because of that. But it's interesting that every young man who loved Jesus in the Brethren had to be a preacher. 3/4 of them couldn't preach their way out of a wet paper bag. But what happened is the people who should be preaching were not preaching because everyone had to. Some of these guys who had a myriad other gifts that are just as valuable for the kingdom of God never got to use those gifts because the thing to do was to be a preacher, young man. And you can probably pass that on. Worship leader. Everyone has to be a worship leader. No, you can't sing. Please. Don't, you might think that that's not helpful for you. So how do you discover what your thing is? It's not a science. But try this. I think you need to find the centering point between 4 questions. This is good, write this down. The centering point between 4 questions. And here's the thing, this isn't just relevant to my 20-year-old self, it's relevant to you because some of you are doing things you shouldn't be doing, and you've been doing them for 50 years. And it's not too late because Jesus always reserves the best wine to last, to be Red Cana in Galilee. Here are the 4 questions. What is your biggest complaint? Now, you might not think this is important, this is really important. Most dreams and visions come out of complaints. Why do you think that should not be? That really irritates me. About the world, about the church, about my life, usually your dream comes out of your complaint. What's your complaint? What do you go to the Lord with and go, come on, God, why is it like this? Second question. Comes out of your complaint. What's your wildest dream? Usually starts with, what would it look like if? What would it look like if the church could be? What would it look like if my family could? What would it look like if business looked like? What would it look like if financial? What would it look like if every child had a home? Whatever the thing is, what's your biggest dream? What's your wildest dream? Don't be restricted by what you think can happen. What do you dream of? Third question. What is your strongest gift? Two words of advice around your strongest gift. Don't be limited by any spiritual sounding gift in the Bible. Because they are just a list of things. Every gift is not exhaustive. It's just here are some gifts, here are some things. Prophets, helpers, administrators. It's like they start lists and they don't. It's a mistake. You should never start a list. Any public speaker knows, never start a list. You always miss somebody out. Never start praying for a list of people. Disaster. Always a disaster. You miss someone out, you get emails. Complaint, dream, gift. So the first thing is don't be restricted. The second thing is because you're in the kind of culture you're in, which I think is not dissimilar to the Scottish culture. Ask a friend because you'll be way too polite to even suggest that you have a gift. Ask somebody. And so what I mean is, what are you good at? What are you really good at? Here's the final question, which is really important for a New Zealand culture. What brings you joy? What do you like to do? Because God's not a bully. He's not down on you. He's not the Grinch. He's not out to give you a miserable. I used to think, I grew up in a kind of church culture where I thought that if God was calling me to something, it was inevitably going to be something I didn't like. Did you ever think that? It must be something that's going to be really hard to do. I'm not going to enjoy it. So I used to pray things like, God, please don't send me to the Bahamas. I'll be like a disaster and I hate that. What's your deepest joy? And somewhere in the centering point, by the way, it's not a point. It's an area. Because God's will is big and dynamic, it changes. In other words, you don't have to worry that you might have missed it, because he's way more gracious than that. Somewhere here is what your stake is. This is good, isn't it? So somewhere here is what your why is. By which I mean, it's not here. It's not here. It's not here, and it's not here. You know, it might bring you joy, and you're good at it, but God's not giving you a great vision or a passion for it. So stop doing it. God might have given you a complaint and a dream, but you hate doing it, and you're not very good at it. Stop preaching. It's rubbish. You bore people. You might have a complaint and you might be good at it, but it's really hard. No, it's not making you do stuff that's really hard the whole time. Come on. Discover what your thing is. And then defend it with 1,000 no's. Let me give you. This is so random. I am jet lagged. Let me try this. How do you make space for that? Because your life is full, isn't it, already? How do you do it? Well, I think that all of us carry 4 bags. I'm going to draw them. Here they are. And the thing is, you're only supposed to carry 1. The problem is you're carrying 4, which means you're too full and you're too tired. Let me tell you what the 4 bags are. Bag number 1 is your bag. That's this. That's the thing you're supposed to carry. That's the thing God made you for. He shaped you perfectly for it. You're supposed to carry that bag. Pick it up, carry it really well. Bag number 2 is called somebody else's bag. You stole it. or it was given to you and you're still carrying it. Somebody else should be carrying it and you're denying somebody else carrying it. So you've been running Sunday school for the last 30 years. You never really enjoyed it. You're not very good at it, but you do it out of duty. And actually you holding on to it means someone else is not able to carry it. Find the person who should do it, train them up, and then hand the bag on. Because it will free you up to do yourself better. The third bag, this is the most important bag for churches. Here it is. This is called nobody's bag. Nearly all of us are carrying in church life and ministry a bag that we shouldn't be carrying. We're carrying it because it was handed to us 50 years ago, because that's what a church should do. Nonsense. Stop carrying the bag. Just because 50 years ago someone started a toddler group in your church doesn't mean you have to continue it. If it's what God is saying to you and you've got people to do it, do it. But you don't have to do it. You're just carrying it around and it's killing you right now. And what happens is that nobody will ever shut anything down. So you just add more and more and more ministries so that you're fuller and fuller and fuller and you have no space to be impulsed by revelation. So you couldn't start a ministry if you even wanted to, or if it fitted in here, because you're too busy carrying the ministries that your parents carried. Stop it. It's killing you. Here's the most damning bag. It's called God's bag. This is very particular for some of you right now. You're carrying responsibility that is not yours to carry. I learned this when I was 19 years of age. That's not true. I was 20. I just come back to Christ, and I started to work in an evangelistic organization, and I was just learning to preach. And I got invited to speak at this massive youth event in London. And there must have been, I don't know, maybe 500 to 700 people in the room, young people. And I knocked it out of the park. I did my funny jokes, my slightly edgy stuff. I told them everything I knew about Jesus. It lasted about 8 minutes, and then I thought it probably ought to be longer, so I kind of repeated it, and it was good, and people were laughing, and it was funny, and then I did what you're supposed to do if you're doing an evangelistic thing. You call people to come to the front, because I'd seen, Billy Graham and all that kind of business, and nobody came. And I was devastated. because I thought that was the measure of whether I'd done. And I rang my dad, and I remember him absolutely ripping into me. Like, he wasn't that kind of guy, but he said, this, Karl, is none of your business. It is none of your business. It's not yours to carry. Your job is to be faithful. His job is to be fruitful. And I remember that to this day. So it is a complete waste of time and actually offensive to God to carry around responsibility for things that are his responsibility. And some of us are doing that. We're doing that with our ministries and our lives. We've got to somehow be successful for God. No, he's not asking for that. He's asking you to be faithful. Some of you were given prophetic words that you're still living under the shadow of. Remember this, prophetic words come from human beings. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they last for a season. But the burden of them can be really heavy in our lives, and we can run around doing things because someone said something that we felt was from God, and it's caused us grief for the whole of our life because we're carrying around this stuff. We've got to serve in this way, in this place. God's not that kind of God. He's a gracious God. Does that make sense? So your job is to carry a bag, not 4. If you have 4 designer handbags and you're doing well. Make space. And then the final thing I would say to my 20-year-old self would be live with open hands. My 18-year-old daughter, Esther, who gets a lot of bad press when I preach, for years she had this phrase which she would use with me whenever she wanted me to have an opinion but didn't have to influence her, and her to be able to do whatever she wanted to do. Dad, you be you. You be you. Which basically meant, I'll be me. You be you. You know, you have an opinion, that's you. You be you. And the reality is that, that's, you be you is absolutely right. As long as you go beyond you. Because you be you is only there so that you can be a blessing to other people. You have to discover who you are, but not so that it might remain selfish, but live with open hands. Do you know, the world is catching up with the theology of heaven. The biggest taxi service company in the world owns no cars. It's called Uber. The world's beginning to catch up. The biggest movie theater organization in the world owns no movie theaters. It's called Netflix. The biggest hotel chain in the world owns no hotels. It's called Airbnb. And the world is catching up with the fact that ownership might be slightly overrated. And it's a biblical principle, isn't it? In fact, it's one of the earliest biblical principles. Own nothing, steward everything. Own nothing, steward everything. In other words, live with your hands like this, not your hands like this. Live open-handed. And do so in your leadership life as well. I stumbled across something maybe 10 years ago or so, which revolutionized my leadership. We have a large staff team. I think we have 28 members of staff in the church. And I'd got them together at one stage and said, so here's the new deal. Nobody gets to serve your ministry. They looked at me. Nobody gets to serve your vision and your dream. What if you served everyone else's ministry and you served everyone else's dream? In other words, what if your job as a leader in the church is to help people discover this? What if that's your job? To help people discover under God who they are, what they're for, and then to resource them and release them. What would happen in even a church like this if instead of the impulse being, here's a vision, come serve the vision, it became, you have a vision and a dream. I want to introduce you to God. I want that to impulse everything you do. Now go out there and make it happen. So instead of restricting that, we released it and resourced it. Let me put it another way. Joseph Campbell wrote a book in the 1950s called A Hero with a Thousand Faces. He wasn't a Christian as far as I'm aware. But his book became one of the staples of English literature because he talked about the mega myth or the meta narrative. And basically he said that every story of our world, every saga, every film that we love to watch has the same storyline. And check it out. I mean, it's basically true. Every Narnia story, every Lord of the Rings story, every Star Wars story, it has a hero and a villain. It has a threshold that needs crossed. It has a mentor. It has a bounty that needs to be achieved. It has a people that are going to be blessed if the bounty is achieved. It has the same story. It's good, evil. It's that story. And here's the thing about the kingdom of God. What if my job is not to be the hero of my own story? I mean, clearly you are the hero of your story. But what if as a leader your job doesn't stop there and your journey doesn't stop there? What if your job is to be the mentor to 1,000 hero stories? What if success is not about being a leader with 1,000 followers, but raising 1,000 leaders? What if that's the thing? What if you're supposed to live with your hands like this? What if you're supposed to give everything away? What if people are supposed to supersede you? What if you don't care whether someone's better than you? In fact, that's your delight if someone becomes better than you. What if you're not fazed by that? What if that becomes the impulse of your life? Nassim Taleb wrote a book called Black Swan. I wouldn't recommend it. It's way too complicated for me. It's a book in which he basically prophesies the 2008 financial crash. And you'll find it in lots of aircraft bookstores. But he's also written a book called Antifragility, which is not a very sexy title. But it's an interesting concept, and you don't have to buy it because I'll tell you what the basic thing is. He says that there are systems in our world which are fragile. And he'll talk about prehistoric man. You basically lived by the fact someone wanted to kill you, and you were waiting to, if you didn't hunt, you didn't eat. That was a very fragile system. If you had a famine or the saber-toothed tiger got you, then that was difficult. And then he talks about robust systems. He talks about something like the German economy, very robust. You put it under a lot of pressure, it's going to be okay. But he says that if you put it under enough pressure, financial crash plus a tsunami plus a massive invasion or something, it will collapse. And then he talks about anti-fragile systems. Anti-fragile system is a system whereby if you put it under extreme pressure, it will flourish. In other words, the more pressure you put it under, the more it grows. And he talks about bindweed. I don't know if you have bindweed in. So the more you try and cut it, the more it spreads. You have to have special chemicals. You have to dig right there, and you have to get to the root. So the more you put, and one of the illustrations that he uses is the early church. Actually, the more pressure you put it under, the more it flourishes. The underground church in China, the more pressure, persecution you put it under, the more it flourishes. Let me tell you why. Because they have learned the secret of living with open hands. They've learned the secret of passing everything on. They've learned the secret of not owning anything. They've learned the secret that it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as we begin to succeed. They've learned the secret of saying, we want to raise 1,000 leaders rather than being an ego culture where we need to have celebrity pastors with 1,000 followers. Because that's a very fragile system. The enemy just takes the head off of the celebrity pastor and everyone else scatters because no one trained them up to grow. So if I was talking to my 20-year-old self, I'd say, let there be no excuses, let there be no regrets, let there be no distractions, live with open hands. Draw a circle, draw a line, plant a stake, open your hands. Carry what you're supposed to carry, not what anyone else is supposed to carry. Find your yes, defend it with 1,000 no's, deal with your heart, get it healed up, and take responsibility for your life. And I think, here's the thing, the reason I'm sharing that today is it's true whether you're 20 or whether you're 60. Isn't it staggering how much of the Bible is written about people who we would write off because of their age? Caleb. Can't remember how old he was. Was 84 or something? He's in his 80s. I'm using a Zimmer, but I'm taking a hill. You know? I mean, it's total nonsense. The Bible sometimes talks nonsense, doesn't it? I'm just as strong, says Caleb. I'm just as strong as I was 40 years ago. No, you're not. But yes, he is. He's just as strong.